So today we start a new teaching series, and I have had this on my to-do list for darn near close to 2 years. Somewhere after we got started with the Kingdom series, this idea came to me, and I have been excited, and it hasn't let me go or left me alone, and so I've been working on this for a little while. Obviously, we did the soteriology series after the Kingdom series, so I've been like waiting, and today is the day. We're going to start a new series, and it could take us a little while. Here's what I want to do. I wanted to do a series on Hebrews chapter 11 and what's often called the Hall of Faith. Hebrews is one of my favorite books. Hebrews 11 is one of my favorite chapters. And it's one of my favorite chapters because of the content at hand, the message of Hebrews 11. I think we might say in Bema language, we might say on a Peshat level. There's just some really straightforward, beautiful challenges and takeaways in that conversation. But the moment you dive just a little bit deeper with Hebrews 11, for me, Hebrews 11 has all kinds of problems. Like it doesn't make sense in how we typically talk about it and view Hebrews chapter 11. And so I wanted to go into that. And here's what I mean by that. Hebrews 11 we often call the Hall of Faith. And when I think of the Hall of Faith, obviously it's a play off of the phrase of the Hall of Fame. Think of the Baseball Hall of Fame or the Football Hall of Fame. And people end up in the Hall of Fame because of their performance, because of the things that they did, because of their accomplishments, because they're famous. They're the best of the best. They're the people that we look up to in the sport to say that's what the sport is about. And in a lot of ways, Hebrews 11 makes sense. Like I look at this list of people and like, this is what faith is about. And I don't even think that's wrong, but I have struggled with that concept because there are references in Hebrews 11 that don't make sense to me. How is that about that character being a model of faith? Things like Samson, like if we truly actually deal with and wrestle with the story of Samson, that story leaves me with a whole lot of questions. Is Samson the model of faithfulness? The very first reference you're going to run into, by faith creation was executed. The world was made. The world was created by faith. The creation of the world with no human component being referenced is a model of faith and faithfulness. That feels weird to me. And so I have been wanting for some time now to challenge myself to do a deep dive through Hebrews 11. And so I want to walk through, in a lot of ways, it's almost going to be one verse at a time. This could take us a while. I'm not even sure. I haven't even mapped out how many videos this will be. I don't think it will be as long as the Kingdom series, but I don't think this will be a short series either, because I want to take every single character that's referenced, which at times is just going to be one verse out of Hebrews 11. I want to dive into that verse and say, why is this reference, why is this person, why is this character being referenced in the Hall of Faith? And so that's going to take us a while. It's one of my favorite chapters. We're probably going to go a little bit out of Hebrews 11 and into Hebrews 12. And this probably won't surprise anybody, but for today's video, I was getting ready. Like I put on my calendar that I wanted to do the production, the filming for this video. And what I put down was the first two references. I put down creation, and then video number 2, I put down Abel. Those are the first two references in Hebrews 11. And as I got ready to do those lessons, I ended up in Hebrews 10. Probably not surprising. Like, what's the context of Hebrews 11? How did we get here? Where is this chapter coming from? And so we're going to take a couple videos to do all the introduction and the setup. And then we're going to get into the series. And then we'll probably have some teaching on the back end, getting into Hebrews 12. Because we have to remind ourselves that the Bible in its original form didn't have the chapters and verses. Like when the writer of Hebrews wrote Hebrews, they did not put a big number 10 and then start writing, which means sometimes those chapter breaks can be, I mean, they can be helpful, but oftentimes they get in the way because we forget that there's not necessarily a break here. Like this is a continuation of what was just being said above it and before it. And so that's what I want to do today. I want to dip back into Hebrews 10 to try to set up Hebrews chapter 11. Now, it might be helpful to go back, if you're interested, and review, if you're a podcast listener, review our teaching on the book of Hebrews. So there's one teaching, there's one podcast episode where we discussed kind of Hebrews as a whole. And that's the one that I would want to home in on. Like I would want to really, that's the one that's going to be guiding the conversation. There was a second episode we did on Hebrews, and then later we did another episode on the idea of atonement, the idea of sacrifice and atonement in the book of Hebrews. I think that's going to be less relevant to our conversation. It's not going to be directly, we're not going to need that. I will go ahead and link those two episodes in the description of this video as well. But the link that's probably more relevant will be the link that basically maps out. We had an infographic that we had in the show notes of that episode. I might even link that separately just for ease, because it was something. That infographic was phenomenal, and it'll help us set this up. So if you listen to that episode, if you remind yourself of what we talked about, if you look at that infographic, you'll be reminded that Hebrews is making an argument. And Hebrews is 13 chapters long, and the first 10 chapters form what's called an inclusio. So an inclusio is a Greek literary device. Oftentimes it will be similar to a chiasm, but not all the times. And I think Hebrews is actually an example of, it may or may not be chiastic, but there is an inclusio. So what that means is that Hebrews 1 through 10 is making an argument. And you as the reader, when you notice the inclusio, you realize that the author is wanting you to know, you need to understand this argument. Hebrews 1 through 10 is an argument. Once you understand this, then Hebrews 11, 12, and 13 is riffing off of, if this is true, then this is the application. If the inclusio is the argument, then the rest of Hebrews is about what do we do with that truth. And so Hebrews 1 through 10, that's why we're going to have to dip into Hebrews 10 to set up Hebrews 11. Because Hebrews 11, 12, and 13 are basically the afterword, the resolution to a larger argument. Now Hebrews 1 through 10, the argument in the inclusio is essentially an argument that Jesus is our faithful and merciful high priest. Jesus is our faithful and merciful high priest. So Hebrews makes this argument. It starts with like what we know and what the prophets have told us and the things that we understand. But then it talks about Jesus coming, the fullness of God being poured. That's a Colossians reference, but Jesus being the perfect image is the Hebrews reference. The perfect image of the invisible God. And he comes and he walks among us, and he suffers, and he shows us how to suffer well, and he shows us how to suffer faithfully. He becomes our faithful and merciful high priest because he joins us in our experience, and he shows us how he is both faithful and he is merciful. And then Hebrews goes on from there to say it's because of this that he's such a effective high priest, and he's like Melchizedek, and he's actually the one that performs the sacrifice. Not only that, he's actually the sacrifice itself. Not only that, he's actually the temple. Jesus is our faithful and merciful high priest. Jesus has shown us what it means to live well, to die well, to persevere in the midst of suffering. Jesus has offered himself as a perfect sacrifice. Jesus has cleansed our conscience. Jesus, and it was my suggestion There are a handful of scholars that have suggested that Hebrews was written in response to the destruction of the temple. The destruction of the temple in AD 70. Somewhere shortly after that, Hebrews is written to basically add commentary to this potential panic of the Jewish people. The temple's gone. What are we going to do? And the writer of Hebrews says, it's okay because Jesus helps us accomplish everything that the temple used to help us accomplish. It's a Jewish conversation. The book is called The Letter to the Hebrews. Like, it's a Hebrew conversation to a Hebrew audience. And so that's the setup. And then I want to read Hebrews chapter 10 to help us set up what we're going to find in Hebrews 11. I'm going to start in 10, verse 19. Therefore, everything I just said, the inclusio, we're wrapping up the inclusio, right? Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened up to us through the curtain. So Jesus has come. Jesus is our faithful and merciful high priest. Jesus has become the sacrifice. He's offered the sacrifice. He's done his priestly duty. We have been atoned for. And so now, the writer of Hebrews says, we can boldly come into the most holy place. That is his body, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart, and with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience, and having our bodies washed with pure water, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess. And this is the call of Hebrews, to hold unswervingly to the hope we profess. For he who promised is faithful. So there is a promise of faithfulness from God, from Jesus, but we have to hang in there. We have to persevere. We have to be resilient. This holding on, this perseverance is the call of the book of Hebrews. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together. Again, don't give up on the things that we're committed to. Stay committed. Persevere. Stay resilient. Not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging each other. And all the more as you see the day approaching. If we deliberately keep on sinning after we have received the knowledge of the truth, no sacrifice for sins is left, only a fearful expectation of judgment and of raging fire that will consume the enemies of God. Again, Hebrews just got done talking about a guilty conscience and how atonement has happened. And so if we give up, if we don't persevere, if we don't stay faithful, if we don't remain strong, if we go back to some old way of sinning or some new way of sinning, if we go on to sin, then all this stuff that we just talked about, it doesn't do its work. It doesn't do its work in my conscience, in my heart, in my head. I'm not truly set free. I just exist under condemnation and wrath of a guilty conscience. Anyone who rejected the law of Moses died without mercy in the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much more severely do you think someone deserves to be punished who has tempted by faith Moses' parents? Turn 2 pages. Who has tempted the Son of God underfoot, who has trampled, my goodness gracious. How much more severely do you think someone deserves to be punished who has trampled the Son of God underfoot, who has treated as an unholy thing the blood of the covenant that sanctified them, who has insulted the Spirit of grace? For we know him who said, "It is mine to avenge, I will repay." And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. This comes, don't just isolate this paragraph. This comes in response to 9 chapters of Jesus as a faithful and merciful high priest. So it's not this paragraph that we should isolate. The writer is saying, if we want to reject everything if you want to trample on Jesus' faithfulness, on Jesus' mercy, on everything we've just gotten done talking about, This is not good. Don't think that God could be mocked. Don't think that God is something you're just going to toss away. Like this has some gravitas here. We've got to persevere. We got to hang in there because of the story that God's calling us to. Remember those earlier days after you had received the light, when you endured in great conflict, full of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You suffered along with those in prison. You joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property, because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. The writer of Hebrews says, I know that you've gone through suffering. I know that you know what suffering tastes like. I know that you yourselves have been through suffering. I know that you have walked alongside of friends, family, other believers who have suffered. And you know what that's like. And the reason that you did it in the past was because you believed that what God was going to do was going to be something great, that there would be some sense of vindication, that you would be, in these words, richly rewarded for your faithfulness and your perseverance. So don't give up now, is what the writer of Hebrews says. Don't give up now. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere. Do you hear this? It's like perseverance is what the author is going for. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. For in just a little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. And my righteous one, will live by faith. And I take no pleasure in the one who shrinks back. There's a quote. We're going to talk about that in the next video. But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and are saved. We do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and are saved. The call of Hebrews is a call to perseverance. Because we have confidence. That was the first section we read. Because we have confidence in the faithfulness and the mercy of Jesus as our high priest, because we have confidence, we stick with it. We persevere. We give ourselves to faithfulness. We can't go back to sin. We can't go on. We can't go back to where we were. We can't just give up on this thing. If we give up on this thing, we're gonna basically trample on. We're gonna mock the very faithfulness and mercy we just got done studying for 9 or 10 chapters. We can't give up. We can't decide we're just going to chuck this aside. We've got to persevere. The writer says, I know you know what perseverance is like. I know that you know. I've watched you suffer. I've watched you stand beside others who are suffering. We've suffered before, and the reason that we've suffered is because we believed that this story was heading somewhere. So don't give up now. Don't give up now. We have to persevere. We have to persevere. We do not belong, the writer says, to those who shrink back. That's not who we are. That's not who God's people ever have been. It's not who we were centuries ago. It's not who we're going to be now. We have to, it's a book, it's this pep talk. It's this perseverance pep talk. Hang in there. Hang in there. Hey, and the temptation is real. It's not just a silly, trivial pep talk. The temptation to give up, the temptation to throw this aside, the temptation to say, is this really worth it? That's a real temptation. So this is a significant pep talk. But it's the writer saying, hang in there. Do not toss this aside. Do not give up what you've believed in. There is a reward at the end of this. There is a prize. There is a fulfillment. Goodness really does win. Shalom is where this is all headed, so don't give up now. And this is going to provide the transition, the foundation of an argument out of which Hebrews 11 is going to... This was the piece that I was missing when I was somewhat lost about Hebrews 11. So we'll talk about that more in the next video. But this is where it starts, a call to perseverance. You cannot give up. I know there's not a lot that you can see on the horizon that gives you much hope. I know that you're tempted to give up, but you cannot give up. We do not belong to those who shrink back. Our perseverance pep talk. So there you go. That'll be our intro lesson. That's where this starts. That's the foundation. That's where Hebrews 11 is going to plant its feet. Hebrews 11 is going to plant its feet on this idea of perseverance. We have to hang in there. We have to persevere. So in the next video, we'll talk about what that looks like to bridge that gap and connect some of those dots. Look forward to talking to you. We'll see you in the next teaching.